Welcome to Funny Chat, the show where we go so far deep into our own vaginas that we question whether we will ever integrate back into society the same again. And honestly, to be honest, maybe what's the point? I'm recording these, as I've mentioned in my last episode, living in my van. I have 3 children, a dog and a cat. The van is 7.5 meters by 2.4 meters. And I'm currently in Morocco. Therefore, you'll find me sitting outside my van while the children have their mornings. And I land wherever we are and record these with background noise. So you might hear some background noise, such as today, you'll probably hear the sea. The sea is quite loud here. And you might hear somebody wandering past every now and then. But I try to do it in a quiet place in the quiet mornings. I'm sitting on the earth and I'm surrounded by these really beautiful flowers and ladybugs that keep coming over to the flowers. I'm looking at the sea. So it's a really beautiful place to be and land here with you today to share this episode. So this episode today is on all things Jenna. I mentioned that I'm basically going back with client profiles and a reminder that this is 2026 and we're not here for any fixing and we're not here for solutions. We're just here for no more coaching and we just want to be here. Because the women that land in these spaces, the spaces that I created over the last 10 years, are women who have done all of that before and they just totally get it, but that something still isn't landing. So the actual question for them becomes what actually creates a shift? And we're in 2026, so what actually creates a shift in 2026? The world is on fire. I've done all this stuff. Like what do I need right now to create that shift moving forward? Last episode was all about Sophia. So just a reminder of who Sophia was. She, on paper, had a really beautiful life, but it was just that sex hurt. And it was that was the trigger to come and see me in that space. Remember that these are fictional characters that I'm creating. Joy was completely flat and she couldn't name what it was that she felt she needed and wouldn't name it either because she needed to remain grateful. And we discussed how there's always a trigger and it's rarely the cause. So the trigger was the painful sex, but that was not the actual cause. The painful sex cannot be the cause of painful sex. So the spaces that I create, they're really simple. And it's taken me a long time to perhaps find the language and the words and the way of sharing these. I tried social media. I constantly get censored. I sometimes tried writing it. I wrote a book called In Your Vagina Lies the Key to Happiness. There's a really good place to see the spaces that I create, but so many people just don't get it. I will say this is the work that I do and they just don't get it because the work does not fit into a box. And also when somebody starts looking at the work, they're like, well, that just sounds really simple. And it is really simple, but it's not actually easy to surrender into the very simple because these women that have worked with me, they've tried the doctors, the therapy, the circles. And I've had women say to me, I don't even get what you do, even when they've committed money and time and space to the space. So they're like, I don't really get what you do, but you feel like my last hope right now. And I actually loved that. And I didn't have that conversation once. I had that conversation several times, if not with most of the clients that work with me, because that's the moment a woman stops trying to figure it all out and really just starts willing to be with herself and feel herself. So what a gift for her to actually just be like, yeah, you're my last hope. I mean, you might look at that and say, well, that might not feel good for you, Naomi, but I actually felt so good when a woman said that, because I would be like, yeah, you actually get what this space is about, even though you might not get it right now, but you will get it over time. So let's talk about Jenna. Jenna is 35. She hasn't found someone to be with, and that's what she has searched for. However, life just has not met her there, and she has been hurt deeply. Jenna, this 35-year-old, is a creative, but right now she's in a job that drains her because she switched to this job as it pays well enough, but it's not exactly filling her up financially, emotionally, and all of the other things, but it gives her enough money to get by. But of course, even though she's got this money now and she's in a job and she has security, she has her own flat, she's probably living in London, let's be honest. She has, as often happens, feels guilty, she has this guilt for being here in this space. So most women have refused to part with money to be in my space and made it abundantly clear that it was a trigger for them to spend on themselves like that, to be there and to be in a space that doesn't have a clear definition. It is an edge for most. So yes, Jenna feels like tending to herself is self-indulgent. She has enough money to get by from this job. She's no longer the struggling creative that she once was. So she's like, I'm finally going to spend money on myself, even though it feels frivolous. Even though this space is the very thing that would bring her back to life, right? And so it's a vicious cycle when we don't commit to certain things that we really want to commit to because of barriers, and then we remain stuck. So I'm going to use some trigger words on this podcast, and I'm not here to not use words, because words need to be used in this space and they need to be used with their definitions. Recently, I shared a whole Substack on this and why, and it was met with a woman messaging me about how I'd purposely hurt her by using this word, which was the whole point of the Substack essay, how society is hurting her by not using the word. And so then this word becomes a trigger and her experience is downplayed, which is why it is the trigger in the first place. So I really will be using words that you might have to sit with and find challenge with. And that is part of society's issue and the projection from society. And it actually needs airtime. You will need airtime for that if something is triggering you in that way. So if you want to read the Substack post, it's on Substack and it's one of the more recent ones, so you can read more about what I'm talking about here. So Jenna was raped in her 20s and her body remembers, but she hasn't told anyone. And for Jenna, she hasn't told anyone because the rape didn't leave her with any physical scars to show for it. So she downplays the experience, and together we reclaim that experience in this space and the word if she wants to. Sometimes women want to reclaim the word in this space and sometimes they don't. I often had women who would come into the space and had never told anybody about their sexual assault or rape experiences because they have consistently downplayed them, and then that memory is stored in the body and results in sometimes pain, discomfort, physically, emotionally. Obviously, emotionally is easy for us to quantify, but pain, like searing pain during sex because we haven't spoken about an experience before, whether a physical experience like rape or sexual assault, or whether an emotional experience from a partner who emotionally manipulated us or something like that, that's really painful. So that needs time. So she lives with what we call vaginismus, which is where the vaginal muscles they're like involuntary, like contract, making penetration really painful, sometimes just completely impossible for women. And I've worked with many women in vaginismus. I think it's really useful to label it as what it is so we can unpick what's happening physically and emotionally. Vaginismus is essentially just a protective mechanism, and it's a super clever mechanism. And I really love talking about it because many, even those with the pain, just don't have the language to describe it. And there's pages on the NHS about it, and no one actually fully understands it, even those giving smear tests in the NHS, which I find really painful and upsetting. I think it's despicable. I actually have had my own smear tests and mentioned vaginismus and vulvodynia to people there before, and they haven't actually understood what even those terms mean, even though there's NHS pages for them. So we don't start with fixing that. So again, what was the trigger? Well, the trigger was probably the vaginismus, but we don't start with fixing that. We go with, how do we make sex work? How do we go with what is holding her body holding? And when I talk about sex, yes, how does sex work? How does pleasure and joy work for her? That's my space more than how does sex work. Most of the women who come to me don't come to me initially with sex hurts. It's just penetration hurts, because they understand that the space is not ever going to be focused on the sex. It's going to be focused on their joy and pleasure first. So what we want to do is start understanding more about her. So her friendships don't quite land. She feels misunderstood. Like, she's speaking a language that like nobody is fully hearing yet. So there's that issue. Also, her dad died 3 years ago. He was her person, her safety, her reference point for love. And since he died, her mum has needed her more and pulled more, demanded more. And when we look closer, her mum has always been emotionally cold. So now Jenna is caught between grief and obligation. She comes home from work, this job that she's now taken, exhausted, and she's tired, but it's not this kind of tired that she's experienced before. It's like a flat. She finds herself scrolling. She's not eating properly. Why cook for one? Kind of vibes. She's not showering as she probably needs. There's that quiet, like, what's the point energy? And that is the freeze response being activated in her. She is in freeze response predominantly throughout her day. But then when she gets home, she's able to just be with the tools and habits that allow her to just be in that exhausted space. So, okay, that's huge. And this is a lot for one 35-year-old woman to hold with no clear support, no clear network. So what does she actually need? And when I write these client profiles, this level of and then compounded with this, and then compounded with this, and then compounded with this is what women are navigating. I don't think often we understand how much a woman is navigating. Women are navigating so many narratives, so many stories, so much trauma, and we're expecting them to simply survive, and women don't want to just survive. So, okay, where does she even start? Okay, she's done some therapy, she's done the exploration, she's read the self-help books, she's a gal that listens to podcasts. So let's start with what she doesn't need. She doesn't need to change everything. She's not to become something new and change anything right now. She needs to understand her patterning. That's it. She needs to understand her patterning. We would begin by looking at her nervous system. So within the course, the journey that I've written, because it's an inspiration I've taken from working with women for over 10 years and pulled on the tools and resources and trainings that I've done, which is extensive over the last 10 years. I've got things in there that would enable somebody to land into what they need right now and understand their patterning. And that is where we start with Jenna. So we need to look at her nervous system, and there's a really great ladder that is actually from the polyvagal theory. So it's in there, and it's a download, and it's a PDF, and then you can hear my explanation of it. So we're not going to go deeply into that explanation of it, but essentially what she needs to be able to understand is how she moves between the states from activation, shutdown to disconnection, but not as something to fix, but just something to recognize. Because once she can see it, she is no longer actually inside it in the same way. So women often go away. I would print it out, this ladder, and they would go away with the ladder. And it was really interesting. I just say, you don't have to do that ladder. You don't have to write anything on that ladder. You can think about the ladder. You can write on the ladder. It'd be interesting to see how you approach that ladder. So if a woman came back and she'd extensively written on her ladder, why had she done that? If a woman had come back with an empty ladder, why had she done that? If a woman had come back and never once thought about the ladder, why had she not thought about the ladder once when that was her task to go away with? What was the ladder bringing up for them? So it's a really useful tool. So we don't start with spirituality for Jenna because she's not actually explored that for herself, but this space does bring in elements of spirituality and trust in that spirituality with a grounded space for it. But there is a quiet voice, because that's why she's here, for this kind of spiritual holding, because outside of that, she has no holding. She has a table with basically 2 legs on it at the moment. She doesn't have the support network that she needs. So that is why she's probably here as well. But we don't really speak to that. We just sort of slide in with what's real for her right now when we start talking about spirituality, but without pushing it in any which way, shape or form. So we have to really think about her life, her body, what's actually going to allow her to start to check in with how her body, her life, her situation slots into the bigger overall experience of being in this world. And maybe we pull an oracle card. So I often would have a space in the cabin where I would have a tray out, and on there would be just little gentle spiritual reminders they're holding, including a pack of oracle cards, and I would offer them, would you like to explore it? There would be probably about 80% of the women who would come to me had never heard of an oracle card, or heard of them and never pulled one. So most of all, they hadn't pulled one. And it's not like a mystical thing, an oracle card. I use oracle cards basically every day of my life, but there are times when I have a break, or there are times when I switch to tarot. But oracle cards just allow us to have prompts, think of questions, think of where we're at. And it's just a way to allow something else to speak through us without us having to speak to it. So what Jenna really is saying is she just wants simple, she wants nature, she wants creativity, and she really, really just wants softness. But not in a way that's like complete and utter surrender to the life that is. So there's a quiet activation within her that's really wanting to be spoken to. So sometimes oracle cards can be really useful for that. And she feels because she can't access it, again, that's why they're useful, and also why this space just to be heard is useful. So actually, what actually we have to have is this a quiet ability to push through the discomfort, which is really triggering Jenna's freeze response right now. So she's not looking for light and love, she's looking for real. So what the real question that we can ask here is, what is the most honest form of tending that she needs right now? The most honest form of tending. Not ideal, not aesthetic, but like real. So what we want to explore is, first and foremost, is another tool that she can lean on. So she's exploring her ladder, whether verbally or whether written down, and then she's then thinking about her spirituality and her connection with the world, but there's nothing for her to do. She's literally not having to do anything else or anything more. The one place that I love holding a woman is in their vaginal steaming. So when we begin with vaginal steaming, we allow what needs to be surfaced to surface. And there's like this real clear holding. So if the person was on a one-to-one with me doing a steam, then I'd place her hand on the coccyx, and as she steams, and move my hands across her back, and I feel her energy. And I can feel like where actually straight away there is, for Jenna, there would be extreme tightness within her pelvis. So imagining that I've literally held Jenna in this vaginal steam, and what I can feel is extreme tightness from within her pelvis. And I've held so many women that I can feel this before we even begin anything else, just by reading the energy of the body. It allows for her to soften into the space, it allows for me to read her body, and it allows for her to know that she can read her body too within that space. We move then into a vaginal massage at some point of working together. And this is all the things that people can do for themselves in the journey that I have. So you can vaginal steam for yourself and you can feel what's coming up. And then you can move into a vaginal massage and you can feel what's coming up. So we acknowledge, first and foremost, that the gates of her pelvis start at her labia. And there is just this refusal of energy at her labia. Like there's an instant, almost like, you are not coming anywhere near me. There is a complete and utter block. But at the same time, there's this almost, but I'm welcoming you into the space, I just don't know how. So what we have to do is be with that refusal energy by acknowledging that first gate, and where that first gate, labia, was ignored, which of course we can think back to her rape experience and maybe other experiences where she felt abandoned after that through other partners. At some point as working together, my finger will be inside, but it doesn't actually move. That's where perhaps most of the magic comes from, is when your finger is inside the vagina and it doesn't move, and you can just check in. And the pain sits somewhere for her between tolerable and unbearable, and we have to be with that fine line, which I talk about in the video with the vagina massage. We have to sit in that. And we stay there the whole time when we first tend to the vagina, by just not moving and being stationary, and knowing that the biggest work was being with the labia and allowing them to know that it's okay and it's safe for them to be held in that space that Jenna has created for herself, and then to be with what the patterning is within the vagina. And then we allow for her to be heard. That's it. And what comes up? Okay, well, even in the first time together, we start sort of, I like to say to women that vagina massage, this kind of therapy that we create together, is a bit like hearing someone have a conversation with someone, but from within the walls of the vagina. And what we can hear coming up is always so fascinating. And for Jenna, it is her father, it is the masculine, and it is the safety, and it is holding. Makes so much sense. This system, her system, learned that the masculine leaves, abandons, and doesn't hold. That's what her system has learned. That's simply the patterning that now exists for her body. It doesn't stay, dies, and that tension, well, it sits on her right side of her body, her masculine side. So the work for Jenna isn't how do we fix this pain, it's how does she begin to trust holding again in men, in money, because that's part of the masculine, in life itself, because we live in a patriarchal world. Alongside that, how does she let herself be held by the feminine, by her creativity, and trusting in that and her own body again through slowness, through creativity, through checking in with herself. So this is Jenna, right? She is completely and utterly not too much, not like behind, not alone in what she's experiencing. And her body, the pain, does not mean that her body is broken and she will not experience joy and pleasure in sex and in life again. But she is a woman whose body is holding a story that no one ever helped her to fully listen to, and that's what she really needs right now. So she doesn't need the answers because she already has them. She just needs this space where her body gets to speak, and she's creating that herself. I'm literally just there creating that space alongside her, which is why this journey online is so beautiful, because people can do exactly the same thing. And when you allow for the spaces to be created where the body gets to speak, then everything shifts, but not all at once, and not cleanly, and not necessarily easily, but it does shift. So that's Jenna. And if you see yourself in Jenna, in any parts of Jenna's story, then I'm literally right here holding you in this space, and you're just right on time to be here listening to this. This is the perfect timing for you to be hearing this. So with these case studies, we're just only touching the sides of the work that we can do together with these specific stories. So over time, we excavate the needs. The woman would integrate whatever has arisen. So Jenna would be integrating this along the way. And it's a really beautiful, integrative journey. And so what's challenging for some people might be hearing this going, oh, well, I can't go to the cabin. No, you can't go to the cabin in the bottom of my garden because it's now owned by a very beautiful woman who doesn't offer these spaces. But I am on the road, and I have to be aware that holding a woman in person isn't exactly accessible to me now, and maybe ever. But I can hold women by creating what I've created online in still this beautiful way, but without it asking for more from somebody, and without it being this 2026 overwhelm. It's just a really beautiful space that I've created, this journey where women can go for themselves. And if you see yourself in Jenna, or if you see yourself in Sophia, or any of the others coming forward, then it's simply there for you to be with when you feel like I'm ready to start making these really small shifts. And the earlier we start making these shifts, when they feel perhaps the most unattainable, is when the gifts really start to happen. So basically, it's a link in the bottom of this cast, and you can find it on my website. You can also find me on Substack. I'm sharing notes religiously now. I'm sharing posts via Substack for here and Nemestia. So if you're also interested to learn more about what I'm doing outside of this space, then I've created Nemestia with Ali. He's editing the podcast. It's a secondary podcast that we have. It's called Nemestia. And sometimes we do diaries, and sometimes we talk about books that we've read, and maybe hopefully sometimes I'll start chatting to other van lifers. And it's just a space to exist in right now alongside this space. So I'm really grateful for you being here and listening, and I'm really sending so much love. If anything has been activated for you, I hope that you can tend to yourself outside of this space. I'm really, when I write these client profiles that I've created, I'm transported right back to the joy and passion I have for holding women in these spaces. And someone like Jenna and someone like Sophia, they are the women that I will always hold close to my heart, where they're just navigating so much. So if you see yourself in that, I'm really holding you in that. Sending so much love. Until next time.